Hey, what's up, everybody? Platform Disciple here with a not really a weird card Wednesday because it's no longer Wednesday. It is a weird card Thursday because I had a very busy day yesterday with some car troubles involved, which ultimately delayed the recording of this video. So I hope you guys will bear with me for this weird card Thursday. But anyways, we do have a real doozy for us. It's going to be Warp World, which is a pretty notorious weird card, probably one that a lot of people will recognize because it's been reprinted a few times. It was originally printed in Ravnica as a rare, but was also later reprinted in both 10th edition and Magic 2010. It's crazy to think that Magic 2010 was so long ago, but that still gives it quite a bit of I guess, time representation relative to some of the other cards we've looked at on this channel. So it is 5 colorless, 3 red, a sorcery, and it reads, each player shuffles all permanents he or she owns into his or her library, then reveals that many cards from the top of his or her library. Each player puts all artifact, creature, and land cards revealed this way into play, then puts all enchantment cards revealed this way into play, then puts the rest on the bottom of his or her library in any order. And of course, as per usual, the rules text has been updated slightly, but in this case, the rules text changes are so minor that I'm not really going to go over them. Suffice it to say, into play has been changed to battlefield, and also he or she has been changed to they, which both, I guess, for the people who care about pronouns and things like that, maybe that is better for you. And for the people who don't, it, at a minimum, shortens the text substantially because we see his or her, his or her, his or her, and if you're able to change his or her to their, in all those instances, it does dramatically shorten the text. All right, so anyways, this card is a card that I would categorize as one of the big red, I guess, chaos effects. So red as a color, lore-wise, is represented by, I guess, freedom and spontaneity. And one thing that kind of connects all of those is randomness, because what could be more spontaneous and free than something completely unpredictable? This leads to, I guess, in many sets, you get the big red, or maybe not necessarily big, but the red, really silly, kind of crazy random card. And generally speaking, those cards are pretty hard to take advantage of because of their intrinsic randomness. A great example would be like Scrambleverse. But Warp World's a little different because there is some hypothetical ways you can take advantage of this. So one way is that it only is getting creatures, lands, and artifacts, and enchantments, and it misses out on sorceries, instants, and planeswalkers. So if you saturate your deck with the types of cards that it cares about and don't put in the cards that it doesn't care about, so then you have a higher chance, or a guaranteed chance, of hitting value off of all of your cards that you've shuffled away, whereas your opponents might not hit any value. Likewise, if you are able to shuffle away small cards that have low mana cost and pull out cards that have a high mana cost, then you are kind of getting mana acceleration out of this card. Admittedly, it's 8 mana, so I mean, take that with a grain of salt. But in a hypothetical scenario, this card does shuffle away tokens. So if you play a deck that's capable of generating a lot of tokens, and run in some very large permanents, you might be able to exchange your tokens, which might be particularly low value, for permanents that might be much higher value. So that's the way to kind of take advantage of this card. So this card is definitely a commander/EDH card. But if you go onto EDH Rec, you will see the sort of commander that uses this is not the sort of commander that I just described, one that produces a lot of tokens to take advantage of it. Although some people are using with Prosh and Krenko, they're in the minority. The people who are most interested in this card seem to be running these like meme decks that are just, I guess, outright silly. Like if you look up the cards that are most highly associated with this card in your main deck of Commander as opposed to the Commander itself. The sorts of cards that people are playing are the big red random effects. And likewise, the top two commanders for Warp World are Norn the Wary, who's just kind of a classic meme card, and Okon and Zenderspilt, who is our partner commanders that flip coins. So it's somebody out there who's thinking, I want this big random card to go with my, random strategy of coin flipping. So not many people are taking advantage of this card, and that's in a large part because it's a high mana cost. The other thing is that in the token decks, although you get to take advantage of this, tokens are quite consistent and reliable, and it's much easier to take advantage of those tokens using traditional means that don't have randomness involved. So anyways, anything you need to know about the card, I'll go over right now as far as the rules go. One big thing is that anything that triggers by this card happening resolves in a particular way, which is that anything that triggers during the card's resolution will wait to be put onto the stack until everything has finished happening. And then the player whose turn it is will put all of their triggered abilities on the stack in any order, followed by the next player in turn order, and so on. And the last on the stack, of course, resolves first, meaning that the player who is last in this turn order sequence is the one whose effects are resolving first. This is quite important because it means that, for example, if I have an effect like Gravedigger that has an enter the battlefield effect that comes off of Warp World, and my opponent has an effect like Rest in Peace, which enters the battlefield and exiles a graveyard, it matters which player in turn order has that effect. So if I am the active player and play Warp World, and my Gravedigger ability goes on the stack, their Rest in Peace ability goes on the stack after, will exile my graveyard, and I won't really get to take advantage of the Gravedigger. I'm sorry, I had just bumped the camera there if you guys noticed that. But anyways, moving on, I guess the reason I'm using Gravedigger and Rest in Peace as an example is that the enchantments, although they come into play after, they still resolve their triggered abilities at the same time as everything else, because this entire card will finish happening before anything kind of like gets in there and starts interrupting it. One thing that you should know is that the enchantments happen after to kind of allow auras to do their thing. So we're going to actually go through the full rundown, which is kind of important, which is that first everybody counts the number of permanents they own, then they shuffle them into the library, then they reveal the top cards until they reveal the total number that is indicated for that player. Then they put the artifact, land, and creature cards onto the battlefield simultaneously, and then they put the enchantment cards on the battlefield simultaneously. The aura cards, if there's enchantment auras, they can enchant any card that was on the battlefield before they came into play, which includes cards that came off of Warp World. So, let's just use Gravedigger as the example because we've already mentioned that creature. If Gravedigger comes into play off the trigger and then somebody gets a pacifism, they can put it on the Gravedigger. But they cannot put it on... I guess maybe pacifism wasn't the right example. Let's use take possession because that can enchant a permanent. So let's say take possession. They can take possession of the Gravedigger because the Gravedigger is already on the battlefield at the resolution, but they could not take possession the Rest in Peace, for example, another enchantment, because those enchantments entered at the same time. So the auras can't target other enchantments or auras. And finally, the cards that are auras or auras that have no valid targets or are not the types of permanents listed, for example, planeswalkers, or if there's instants and sorceries, those all go on the bottom of the library in any order. All right, so that pretty much covers the bulk of the effect. The last thing you should probably or maybe not the last thing, but one of the things that you should know about this card is that, like I mentioned, tokens count. And just an interesting fact is that the tokens do get shuffled into your library, but the rulings suggest that you don't do that, because as soon as Warp World finishes resolving, those tokens will cease to exist, and any tokens that you would have flipped off of the effect are ignored. So you shouldn't bother shuffling them in, even though hypothetically they would be shuffled in. And I mentioned in a previous episode that the owner of a token is the player that the token entered the battlefield under their control. So if you play Hunted Dragon and your opponent gets the Knight tokens, even though you control Hunted Dragon and own Hunted Dragon, your opponent is the owner of the tokens, and therefore they shuffle those tokens into their library and would get the bonus 3 cards off of Warp World, not you. All right, and the very last thing to know, which is relevant for Commander and pretty much Commander only, which is that if a permanent somehow leaves the battlefield with Warp World but doesn't go into the library, like for example, if it's a commander and you choose to move that commander to the command zone instead of the library, it's still counted as one card shuffled, basically. So if you have a commander plus 3 creatures, your number is still 4. So that's a very important detail. All right, so that covers the card pretty much in full. As far as applications go, like I said, token commanders or token decks in general can take advantage of this card, but it's so random and so high mana cost that most people aren't doing it, and I feel very similarly about that. But some people really like the idea of having just a chaos deck, which is more thematic and fun than anything else, not really practical for doing anything other than making people, I guess, laugh or look up rules to try to figure out how some of these wacky cards actually work. So it has some value, I guess. And as per usual, we have a giveaway. I have done a foil peel, which I have mentioned before. And foil peels are foil cards where you've removed part of the foiling and pasted it to another card. It's very easy to do. If you were looking to do that, maybe I could make a video about it, or you could probably look it up on your own. But this one, I think, turned out phenomenally. It is a swamp that has Deathmark on it. And what's really cool about that, aside from just it being this cool, creepy eyeball, is that it still has the black mana symbol in the box. So if you like this foil peel altar and you would like to be the owner of this foil peel altar, there are giveaways every week, and there will be a link in the description. And in case people were wondering, there is pretty low competition on these. So if you are even remotely interested, by all means, please join. I would like the card to go to somebody who is going to enjoy it. And until next time, everybody, peace out.